Brad. Brad's a handsome, physically fit, and well-dressed guy. He looks like a winner. He sits down and he tells me his story. I hadn't spoken to my family in almost a decade. I was jobless for years. In fact, the work I was doing wasn't exactly honest labor. I'd lost all my friends. I was alone, living on the streets. I was a pill addict and an alcoholic. It had been years since I'd gone a day without a drink or a drug. I worked the system. I got the prescriptions that I needed until I got arrested. Things were actually better in jail. I had a bed, a roof, some food, some friends. Pills were easy to get. And it was easy to get drunk. I could just drink the alcohol out of the liquid hand sanitizer. And then Brad got contacted by Beit Teshuva. As most of you hopefully know, Beit Teshuva is a Jewish faith-based recovery center here in Los Angeles, which focuses on the spiritual healing of addiction. It's a place where lost souls get found. It's a nonprofit rehab that serves addicts of all kinds and their families. Beit Teshuva helped Brad. He had no resources, and they helped him get out of jail and into their treatment facility, where he was given a chance at a new way of life. And according to Brad, the most important thing that Beit Teshuva did for him was take him to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. In AA, Brad found a higher power, God. And in Beit Teshuva, Brad refound the Judaism that he had left behind after his bar mitzvah. Today, Brad has a job, a place to live, a real relationship with his family. And it's been over 4 years since he took a pill or a drink. Stories like Brad's are inspiring. But for far too long in the Jewish community, these stories went untold. We didn't talk about alcoholism or addiction. Past generations wanted to believe that addiction didn't exist amongst Jews. A shikar is a goy. A drunk is a non-Jew. And it was a shanda if someone in your family drank too much, or gambled, or got in trouble with the law. And even if we had been talking about it, what could we have really done? There was no real solution. Temperance pledges, lobotomies, the 18th Amendment, prohibition, all reactions to drinking behavior here in our country. And when these ideas didn't work, they actually backfired, and the stigma associated with alcoholism and addiction grew. In 1935, everything changed. Everything changed for millions of alcoholics and addicted people all around the world. Alcoholics Anonymous was formed. A simple altruistic program where one alcoholic helps another stay sober through the guidance of the 12-step process. The 12 steps. They've helped families get rebuilt and strengthened, and the addict, the alcoholic, the overeater, the gambler, the person in recovery is often reborn as a productive and vibrant member of their community. But we weren't doing a very good job. We still weren't talking about it. It wasn't until the late 1970s that a Federation task force created a weekend retreat for people in recovery and their families, blending Judaism and the 12 steps together. Finally, a safe space for Jews in recovery, to talk to each other. That retreat was the birth of JACS, Jewish Alcoholics, Chemically Dependent Persons, and Significant Others. Since then, organizations like JACS, like the Jewish Board of Family and Children's Services, the URJ, the CCAR, and our own Kalsman Institute have all done important work educating about recovery. Here at HUC, we're fortunate to have classes and the Spiegel Seminar where recovery is spoken about openly. And here in LA, there are Jewish institutions that hold 12-step meetings. There are day schools and camps that teach about substance abuse prevention. And Beit Teshuva is always offering new and creative ways to help people like Brad. In recent years, we've been doing a better job of supporting the work of recovery and of those who need help. But our work is not done. See, Brad had another problem. When Brad left Beit Teshuvah, he didn't have a driver's license or a car to get back to that community that he was so fond of at Beit Teshuvah. So he looked for a temple close to where he was living. And he found a warm and welcoming congregation. And he was so grateful that at the oneg after services, right next to the wine, there was grape juice. In recovery, Brad had learned that being of service and volunteering was a helpful way to stay sober and a great way to make friends. So Brad introduced himself to the rabbi, who then introduced him to the woman who was in charge of programming for adults, young adults. And he said to her, "How can I be helpful? What can I do to be a part of?" And she offered him a chance to help plan a happy hour with 20s and 30s people. And to come to the camping trip that was coming soon, where there was sure to be a rowdy drinking environment around the campfire. Brad was devastated. Even though there was grape juice at services, he was so afraid of what appeared to be an alcohol-driven community that he never went back. Now, how would anyone have known Brad's story? He didn't tell it. And no one asked. No one stopped to find out who he was or what he needed. No one really talked to him to see what was inside. He was immediately judged by his outsides. Something similar happened to Noah in this week's Parsha. After the flood, the first thing that Noah does, plants a vineyard. Why? Is he planning on making Kiddush? Bereshit Rabbah suggests that he was attempting to isolate himself, that he was overwhelmed by the destruction of creation, that he wanted to escape, that he needed to take that edge off. So he had a drink. And then he had another one, and another, and he ended up drunk, passed out, and naked. And when his 3 sons found him, they covered him up. And then they turned their backs on him. Not to avoid seeing him naked, as some of the commentators think, but because they were ashamed. Vayar ham avi Kanan et ervat aviv, vayaged lishnei echav bachutz. Ham saw his father's nakedness, told his 2 brothers outside of the tent. What did they say? Were they snickering? Were they stigmatizing? Were they consoling each other? But they didn't talk to Noah. There was no asking what was going on, no offer of support. His sons only talked amongst themselves behind his back. They didn't talk to Noah, their father, who might just be the first alcoholic recorded. So when Noah sobers up and sees the aftermath of his drunkenness, is it any wonder that he curses them? Is it any wonder that he would be blameful, ashamed, or scared? Why wouldn't Noah want to isolate? And why wouldn't Brad want to? Just because we've been doing a better job does not mean that our work is done. We need to recommit to making our communities welcoming to those in recovery. I'll share with you an example of what I mean. Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton is so committed to this idea that they have a lay-led recovery team, a recovery page on their website, a dedicated person who takes anonymous phone calls, and on their member name tags there's an optional sticker for people who are in recovery, so they can choose to let people know. I'm not suggesting that this is what we should do in all our communities, but I am suggesting that Congregation B'nai Israel is modeling an open and ongoing conversation in its community so that the people can find the support that they need and want. I believe that as future Jewish leaders and as members of communities, that we must encourage awareness and education about recovery in our own circles and support important institutions like JACS, like Beit Teshuvah, and like Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to ask of you 2 things. First, in the back of the room there are pamphlets. They're entitled, "The Clergy Ask About Alcoholics Anonymous." Take one and read it. Clergy, guests, staff, future leaders, anyone. I hope that reading it will give you a deeper understanding of what AA does and how we can help. AA can help people get sober and begin to get their lives together. But it has limitations. our job is to welcome people in recovery back into the world, outside of AA. Secondly, let's create more Jewish spaces that someone in recovery can feel comfortable being in. Let's keep reimagining our programming and reinventing institutional culture so that less programs revolve around alcohol or other potentially addictive behaviors. We as leaders need to help facilitate environments where recovery is part of the conversation. We cannot afford to be like Ham and his brothers, talking about it behind someone's back and helping to isolate those that need us, like Noah or Brad. Just because we've been doing a better job does not mean that our work is done. So I pray. I pray that God grants us the serenity to accept the things that we cannot change, like the fact that alcoholism and addiction exist in our communities. And I pray that God grants us the courage to change the things that we can, like hosting more and different types of 12-step meetings, like preaching about addiction, like bringing in prevention education for teens and adults, and making sure that there's grape juice at the Oneg. And I pray that God grants us the wisdom to know the difference, to come to know the differences that make each of us unique, to come to know the difference between the Brad of old and the Brad in recovery. I got to know Brad on the inside and the outside. He's an alcoholic, and he's an addict. He's also a mensch who wants to be a part of a Jewish community. He's doing his tshuva in the world. And it's our job not to turn away from people like him or the generations that will follow.